Today on Think Smart with TMFG, Mike and I are going to be discussing the bully that is Donald Trump.
I feel like a little kid in a playground, don't you?
I totally do, and he's trying to beat everybody up, or at least he's threatening to beat everybody up. First off, let me say we're in our new media room at our new office. We're about 80% complete, so not 100% complete. But this is our new space. You see our background. That background will be constantly changing as we do new podcasts and videos over time. But welcome to the future. So, Mike, let's get started. I don't know where to start with Donald Trump. There is so much that I think it's interesting to uncover. I'm going to start off with a little story. This was back in 1995. And at the time, I was with a company called Equion, and we had created a new company called Asante. We merged with a firm called Loring Ward, which was out of Winnipeg. And to celebrate, we were headed to New York for a couple of days celebration to share some ideas with our new merger. And we had a guest speaker in the afternoon. And the guest speaker at the time was Donald Trump. Yep. And we were all very excited. At the time, Donald Trump was sort of the top property guy, real estate guy in New York. He hadn't had his TV show or any of that yet. And we were excited for a motivational speech from Donald Trump. And we headed into this room. There was probably about 50 people in the audience. And Donald, for the next hour and a half, 2 hours, gave us a presentation that none of us will ever forget. All he did for the whole time was talk about himself, how great he was, and he literally then proceeded to talk about anyone who had crossed him in his life, and his number one objective was revenge. And his plan was to take revenge on all of those individuals who had crossed him in his life. Property owners, lawyers, political people, whatever it was. And his objective was to take them down. We went in expecting a motivational speech, Mike, and it was anything but motivational. In fact, we came out despising the man, going, that was the worst presentation I've ever seen in my life.
Well, it's funny when you look at, usually when a president is going for an election, your home state's always your big advantage, right? Donald Trump didn't win New York. Everyone hates him, right? It's his own state went and didn't elect him. And it's just because he's created so many enemies along the way. I might have said this before in a podcast, but my dad, we worked in the 70s in New York, and my dad was in construction. And from when I was a little kid, Donald Trump was the worst guy. He said he's gone and no one gets paid because all his friends would work and do jobs for him, and no one gets paid. He's out to screw everyone. So I always grew up with that in my mind in the States, that he was just not a great person along the way.
So what started the whole thing? The whole thing really started, he came into power, and even before he came into power, he said, I am going to introduce tariffs on my neighbors. Canada to the north and Mexico to the south.
Yeah.
Or southwest. And the plan was initially to introduce 25% tariffs across the board to both countries, because what he was saying was that they were taking advantage of the United States of America. And so this was his bully mentality, that it was time for revenge. They had taken advantage. It was time to take revenge on these two countries and to put them in their place. And the interesting thing, and we all know the background, is that he's the individual who was boasting about the free trade agreement the last time he signed when he was president of the United States. So it's his own agreement that he's saying is a horrible agreement. He's the one who came up with it. He's the one who pushed it forward.
It was funny, with this free trade, now it's become more a worldwide thing, right? On my work today, this stuff just baffles me, and I have to keep on thinking about it. U.S. is a relatively highly populated country, but compared to the world, what do you think U.S. represents of the world population?
It's pretty small.
It's under 5%. It's got, I think, 360, 380 million people, and there's 8 billion people in the world, so it's somewhere south of 5%. What percentage of the world markets does U.S. own?
Probably, of the world market, 60%.
So how, when you have 5% of the population, can you be an unfair trade agreement with the rest of the world when you own 60% of the marketplace. The U.S. economy is built on exporting goods to everyone. There's not enough people in the U.S. to use everyone else's goods. It's just like from a straight simplicity way to look at this, it doesn't make any sense.
And it can't get much better, and it shouldn't get much better because you're already at a huge advantage.
That's the problem with greed. Greed helps bring people to a certain point, but at a certain point, greed gets stupid. And this is where it's getting to a stupid point.
So one of the things that Donald Trump has done to Canadians is he's threatened to take over the country economically. Not by military force at this point. He said he's going to take it over economically. He's going to punish us with these tariffs. And if we try and combat tariffs, he's going to put more tariffs on top of the tariffs. The thing that's interesting for me is I always sort of look at, well, what is the impact going to be on American businesses? We've already seen a push to start buying Canadian. So let's say you're importing Campbell's soup into Canada. And that product happens to be made, some of it's probably made in Canada, some of it's made in the U.S. If we stop buying that soup because it's an American company, their sales are going to go down. Now, granted, that's not going to impact their U.S. sales, but it will impact their Canadian sales. If those sales drop by half and Canada represents 10% of their market, that's a 5% drop in sales for Campbell's soup. What do you think the shareholders, the executives of Campbell's soup are going to be telling their president?
Yeah. There's got to be pushbacks. I mean, the auto industry may be the stupid example of all. Like in the auto industry, everyone manufactures. When you set up a plant, you manufacture a car, right? So I think Toyota has Camrys. I might be wrong on this, but I think Camrys are done in Canada. There's different places where each car is manufactured. And the idea is that every place can work on one car. And then they'll have another car that's manufactured in Michigan, another one that's done there. And the idea of trying to charge tariffs on cars, it just means you have to decide which type of car you're going to need, whether the SUV is going to be based on where it's coming from rather than what you need. It just doesn't make any sense. It's baffling how it's in there, and it makes any sense to anyone.
So let's go to a couple of other things that have happened. One, he met with Justin Trudeau, and basically he put Trudeau in his place, saying, we're going to take over. You're going to be the 51st state, and we're going to take you over. You'd be better off. You can be the governor of the 51st state, and you'll probably be really happy with the end result. He then proceeded to talk about Greenland and Panama. We don't even want to talk about what he did to the Gulf of the United States. Goodness knows what he's going to do to the Great Lakes. Maybe Lake Ontario becomes Lake, who knows, Lake New York. I don't know.
We should agree to be the 51st state, then have an election right afterwards to see if he gets in when we get our electoral votes.
One of the things he's requested is that Canada hasn't kept their part in terms of military spending. And, I think that's probably the only logical thing that he has said. We've always relied on the protection of the U.S. being our neighbor, that we were always safe, so we didn't really need to spend much money on the military. Yeah. That's probably, I'm not a big believer that you need a military, but you do need, it's like anything. You do need an enforcer in the world. In sports, you always need an enforcer. The same as in politics, you always need an enforcer. The other thing that is interesting is I think you find out really who your friends are when you go through something like this. And I'm going to tell a little personal story. I have a brother-in-law that is American, and they live in Canada now. And he actually wanted to vote for Trump because he votes by party, not by the leader. I never knew this until recently, and he's been my brother-in-law for over 20 years now. And I never knew that he was a Trump supporter until it came out one time at dinner, and I was in shock. My business partner, Mike, you're still an American.
Not a Trump supporter, though.
But you're not a Trump supporter. But I'm going to tell a story that happened about a little over 20 years ago. And at the time, I was making a decision to leave company product. And I had made the move with my clients to move the assets to Dimensional Fund Advisors, and we're still extremely happy where we are. And at the time, I was in a gathering. It was in an establishment. We had a nice dinner, and we were sitting at the bar later on. And the head of the company at the time decided to berate me for my decision in front of all of my counterparts, all of my business partners and financial advisors. What was interesting at the time is the bully was in the room, and that was the president of the company at that time, who shall remain nameless.
Yep.
What was interesting for me is not one single one of my fellow advisors, people I considered friends, stood up for me. Not one. And I think their fear was of the bully. And we're seeing that now with Donald Trump. Everyone's fearful of the bully in the room. And they don't know how to respond. They don't know how to react. Typically, the only way bullies respond, I hate to say it, is to get punched in the face.
Yeah.
And it's a shock for them because they've literally used their words to do their bullying. And no one yet, at least on the Canadian side, has been willing to do that. And whether someone shows up to do that, who knows?
I mean, the big thing that people are going to have to do is if we get right now we need to have an election. We need to get power in Canada. Whoever it is, we need one person going to be in control for the next 4 or 5 years. And they need to go and start to come up with some trade systems with Europe. I mean, right now the world is, we can ship things pretty easily. I mean, things are being shipped from the States. Rail and overseas isn't that much of a difference. But Europe is going to need that trade partnership too. You know, in the European Union, they just finished losing England, right? That was a big thing, to lose Britain from the whole European Union. Canada would be a wonderful replacement.
So, Mike, we don't know how this story's going to end. We don't. We're sitting here doing a podcast, but I think it's important we talk about what we do know, having been through numerous events, not quite like this. Every event is different. It is always different. But the end result, I think, is always the same. So let's cover a couple of things. Everything that's gone on is priced into the market already.
Unless you're the only one that figured out there's a trade war going on, it's priced in.
So Donald's bullying around the whole world. He's trying to solve Russia and Israel and Palestine and you name it. He's, trying to create the French Riviera in Palestine. And at the end of the day, what do we know? We know that the market has priced in what? It should be down 10, 15%. Maybe 20% given all this bad news that's out there.
So it priced in both the bad news and it priced in the odds of it actually happening. Remember, we went through this 7 years ago and there was no tariffs. At the end of the day, there was a negotiated settlement. So that's priced in the percentage chance that this is going to be settled without tariffs. And that's why the markets haven't fallen as quickly as you think they would.
So in theory, you think there's going to be an agreement. It may favor the U.S., it may not. Donald wants it to favor the U.S., but at some point there's going to be an agreement that's reached to make a settlement.
We're not a competitive nation for the U.S. This is why things don't make sense, and why it's frustrating is because we have higher wages, we have higher environmental costs, we have higher taxes. It's very difficult to produce
Two languages.
It's very difficult to produce something cheaper in Canada than you can in the U.S. and a smaller population. So we have no competitive advantage other than minerals and oil over the U.S. So at the end of the day, when these negotiations come down, it should come out to be neutral like it did last time. So,
Mike, the market is up since the beginning of the year. It's up since the beginning of the election. We've seen a couple of things that have taken place. We've seen a weaker Canadian dollar. Inflation appears to be under control in Canada. And so they're continuing to lower interest rates. That's even making the dollar worse than it is.
Yep.
Because in the U.S., they're still facing inflation. If these tariffs come in, they're going to even see more inflation.
You might even see interest rates go the other way and start to go up.
Canadian dollar could drop to 60 cents. I'm not saying it could, but it's been there before. There's no reason it can't go there again. We're looking at the Canadian government is back to bailing people out, helping companies out that are impacted by the tariff. I never think that's a good thing.
Yep.
I think that's just spending money that we don't have and giving it to people who don't necessarily need it. And if they get bailed out, they're not going to make the changes they need to make internally, which may be finding new trading partners.
There's a great speech from Ronald Reagan, and I shared it with the staff. I wish I could share it with everyone here, but it's a great speech talking about why tariffs don't work. This is when he took over the government back in the 1980s, and he went in and said, all the tariffs do is make it so you become less competitive, and you rely on tariffs rather than innovation to be competition. And when you rely on taxes and tariffs to be competitive with other nations, eventually those taxes just disappear and the other nations begin to outperform you and get ahead of you. And that's what this leads to. And Reagan was a very smart. It's funny because when you talk about politics, I used to be very much a Republican because I thought Reagan was great. I loved some of the stuff he did. I think he was my hero as a kid. I thought he was great. But this has nothing to do with the Ronald Reagan administration. It's the opposite. Our free trade agreement with Mulroney was done by Reagan and Mulroney, right? That's where free trade was originated, from the Republican Party working together with Canada's conservatives to create a free trade agreement. And now it's just being thrown out the window. And it worked well. Like the last 30 years have been great. I don't know how you can say it hasn't worked well for people. From the U.S. and from Canada, the free trade agreement worked very well.
It's been great.
Yeah.
Why would we mess with it?
Yep.
So let's talk about what should you do? What should you do with your portfolio? And I guess the thing that I start with, number one, have your goals changed? Have you, if you're already retired, you want a certain amount of income. You may need a little more income now because Canadian dollar's low. Certainly if you want to travel, you need a few more dollars. Has your time horizon changed? In all likelihood, not. Has your life expectancy changed? No, hasn't changed. Has your spending changed? Well, yeah, you may be buying a little more Canadian. Maybe it's a little more expensive, but we'll be able to gauge that with inflation. But if you've got a good portfolio with at least 60% equities, you should be fine. And has your income dramatically changed? Unless you were getting 40% of your revenue or your business owner from a U.S. company, then you're probably fine. So if none of those things have changed, why should we even think of changing your portfolio? Your portfolio was designed to go through periods of uncertainty like this. That's why we do those Monte Carlo analyses that we talk about. That's why we update those financial plans every 12 to 24 months.
If there was no uncertainty, we'd have everyone 100% equities. Why wouldn't you?
Right?
Right? It's just how things are. Uncertainty is why you get rewarded. And when you have that equity position in your portfolio, that's getting rewards for uncertainty. So you need to go, this is the time when you want to have the balanced portfolio. It's going to get you through the ups and the downs. If markets do go down, we do have protection in the portfolio to get through that. And we also have the ability to rebalance when things are down. And that rebalancing process will allow us to take care of market swings and put you on top of the game.
At the end of the day, Mike, I think the most important thing is this too shall pass. You and I have faced all of these things over 30 years, all these different types of corrections, wars, COVID, you name it, financial crisis where banks were disappearing overnight. And yet our strategy of sticking with the plan has held true, and there's no reason it won't get us through this.
Yep.
This brings us to the end of another week. This is Rob and Mike with Think Smart from McClelland Financial Group of Asante Capital Management.